Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. It seems like everywhere we turn these days, there's just a flood of information. Figuring out what's actually true, what to believe, well, it can feel overwhelming. It's kind of like trying to find your way out of a maze blindfolded, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's precisely why we decided to do a deep dive into critical thinking for this episode. Think of it as giving our listeners a mental toolkit, the kind that helps you slice through all that noise and get to the core of things.
Exactly. And for our listener, the learner who wants to really grasp these concepts quickly and effectively, we're focusing on the most important, the foundational stuff. We're not going to get bogged down in all the details, but rather try to provide a solid understanding of how to think clearly and make good judgments.
Right, because no one wants to feel like they're drowning in information overload.
For sure. So where do we even begin with something as big as critical thinking?
Well, the mission for this deep dive, if you will, is to explore the fundamental building blocks of good reasoning. We'll be looking at claims, how they work, how they're structured, and how they fit into arguments. And of course, we can't forget about evidence, which is really the backbone of any solid argument.
Sounds like a plan. And all of this is drawn from the book Critical Thinking by Jamie Carlin Watson, Robert Arp, and Skyler King.
That's right. They've done a fantastic job laying out these ideas, and we're going to try to make them even more accessible and useful for our listeners.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. We've got to start with the most basic element of reasoning, and that's the claim. Now, we all use the word claim in everyday conversation, but in critical thinking, it has a very specific meaning.
Absolutely. So, in this context, a claim is a declarative statement. It's asserting that something is the case, whether it's true or not.
So it's not just like a casual opinion or a question. It's a statement that's put forward as a fact, right?
Exactly. It's like saying, this is how things are, or this is what I believe to be true.
Got it. And the book highlights two key aspects of a claim. First, it declares something.
Right.
And second, it expresses something about the world, about what they call states of affairs. Now, this could be something physical, like there's a chair in the room,
Yeah.
or it could be an internal experience, like I'm feeling happy, or even a possibility like it might rain tomorrow.
All of those are examples of states of affairs.
And the book emphasizes that recognizing a claim as a declaration about the world is that first step in critically evaluating it.
Makes sense. You have to know what you're dealing with before you can assess it. Really.
Exactly. Now, here's where things can get a little tricky. The book points out that the same claim can be expressed in many different ways.
Oh, yeah. This is really important because it means you have to be able to see past the surface level of the language and understand the underlying meaning of the claim.
It's like language can sometimes be a bit of a disguise artist.
It definitely can. But once you understand this, you can start to see through the different phrasings and get to the heart of what's being asserted.
Right, like the sentence is, it's raining, the weather is wet, and raindrops are falling from the sky. They all express the same basic claim, right?
They do, yeah. Even though they use different words, they're all saying that there's water falling from the sky.
And the book argues that being able to recognize the same claim, even when it's dressed up in different words, is crucial for effective reasoning.
It is. It's like having X-ray vision for language.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we've got the basic idea of a claim,
Uh-huh.
but the book then goes deeper and distinguishes between different types of claims.
Yeah, because not all claims are created equal.
Right. And the first type they talk about is descriptive claims, which seem pretty straightforward.
Yeah, descriptive claims are just what they sound like. They describe how the world is, was, or could be.
It's about stating facts, or at least what someone believes to be facts.
Exactly, like the earth is round, or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
Okay, so those are claims about what is. Then we have prescriptive claims, also called normative claims, and these sound like they're a bit more, well, judgmental.
Yeah, prescriptive claims go beyond just describing. They tell us how the world ought to be, or how we should behave.
So it's not about what is, but what should be.
Right, it's about values, rules, or recommendations.
So instead of saying, most people enjoy pizza, a prescriptive claim would be something like, you should try this pizza, it's amazing.
Exactly. It's a shift from describing to directing.
And recognizing this difference is really important because it helps you understand what kind of influence the speaker is trying to have on you.
For sure. Are they trying to inform you about the world as it is, or are they trying to persuade you to do something or believe something?
Right. Now, the book gives examples of prescriptive claims from different areas, like law, ethics, social norms, and even religion. Can you give us a quick rundown of how these work in practice?
Sure. So, for example, A legal prescriptive claim would be something like, you must start at a red light. It's a rule that we're obligated to follow.
Makes sense. What about an ethical claim?
An ethical claim might be something like, it's wrong to steal. That's a moral principle that guides our behavior.
Okay, and what about social norms?
A social norm could be something like, you should shake hands when you meet someone new. It's a customary practice in many cultures.
And lastly, a religious claim.
Well, a religious claim might be, you should pray 5 times a day. It's a duty prescribed by a particular faith.
Okay, so all of these are examples of how prescriptive claims set standards for how we should act or what we should believe.
Right, and it's important to remember that these claims are not necessarily about objective truth in the same way that a descriptive claim might be.
Like, whether the earth is round is a matter of scientific fact, but whether it's wrong to steal is a matter of moral judgment, which can vary depending on your ethical framework.
Exactly. So understanding that distinction is really helpful when you're analyzing different types of claims.
Okay, now let's move on to another way that the book categorizes claims. Simple versus complex.
Yeah, this is about how claims are structured.
Right, and this seems like it could add another layer of complexity to our claim decoding skills.
It can, but it's also really empowering because it gives you the tools to break down even the most intricate statements and see how they're put together.
Like taking apart a complicated machine to see how all the gears and cogs work together.
Exactly. So starting with the simplest, a simple claim makes just one assertion.
One idea, one statement. Give us an example.
Okay, the cat is sleeping on the couch is a simple claim.
Straightforward and easy to grasp. So what makes a claim complex?
A complex claim combines 2 or more simple claims using logical operators.
Logical operators. Sounds intimidating.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. The book explains several key operators, and they're all words or phrases we use in everyday language.
Okay, that's reassuring. So what's the first one?
Well, the first one is conjunction, and it uses words like and or but to join claims together, like I like coffee and I like tea. That's a complex claim made up of 2 simple claims linked by and.
Right, so it's like saying both things are true at the same time.
Exactly. For the entire complex claim to be true, both parts have to be true.
Okay, got it. What's the next operator?
Next up is disjunction, which presents alternatives using words like or. For example, either you'll study for the test or you'll fail.
So it's like saying at least one of these things has to be true, but maybe both.
Right. In logic, or usually means at least one is true. It could even be both, unless it's an exclusive or, meaning only one or the other.
Interesting. So it's either this or that, or maybe both. What else do we have?
Then there's negation, which is super simple. It just denies a claim using not. So the sky is not green is a negation of the claim, the sky is green.
Makes sense. It's just the opposite of the original claim.
Exactly. Now, the next 2 are a little more tricky. Conditionals and biconditionals.
Oh boy. Those sound like something out of a logic textbook.
They do sound a bit intimidating, but they're really just about relationships between claims.
Okay, so what's a conditional?
A conditional is an if-then statement. It's like saying, if it rains, then I'll stay inside. The if part is the antecedent, and the then part is the consequent. It's asserting that if the first part is true, then the second part will also be true.
So it's like setting up a cause and effect relationship. If this happens, then that will happen.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, and what about a biconditional?
A biconditional uses the phrase if and only if.
Oh yeah, that one.
It's a much stronger connection than a simple conditional because it means the 2 parts are completely linked. Like, you can graduate if and only if you pass all your classes.
So one thing is true precisely when the other thing is true.
Exactly. It's a 2-way street.
Got it. The book has an exercise about these operators. Were there any examples that really highlighted how language can sometimes hide these complex claims?
Yeah, absolutely. Even simple sentences can contain these logical structures without making them obvious, like, you can have dessert after you finish your dinner. That's actually a conditional statement in disguise. It's saying, if you finish your dinner, then you can have dessert. But the if part comes after the then part in the sentence.
Ah, I see. So we have to be careful not to just get caught up in the surface structure of the sentence, but to think about the underlying logical relationship between the claims.
Exactly. It's like being a detective for hidden logical connections.
Okay, so we've explored claims in detail, how they work, the different types, and how they can be simple or complex. Now let's move on to the next crucial element, evidence.
Because a claim without evidence is like a house without a foundation.
That's a great analogy. So what does the book say about the different types of evidence we might encounter?
It introduces a really useful distinction between direct and indirect evidence.
Okay, so direct evidence, that sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is. Direct evidence is information you acquire through your senses, through your personal experience.
So things like seeing a bird fly by, or feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin, or even just knowing that you have a headache.
Exactly. It's firsthand information.
You're experiencing it directly in the moment.
Right. However, the book makes a really important point that direct doesn't mean unmediated access to absolute truth. Our senses are instruments, and like any instrument, they can be fallible.
Right.
They can be influenced by our biases and expectations.
That's so true. We all have our own unique perspectives and interpretations of the world.
We do. So even direct experience has this layer of interpretation built in.
It's not a perfect reflection of reality, but it's still the most immediate access we have to the world around us.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so then we have indirect evidence. How is that different?
Indirect evidence relies on a mediating source. It's information you get secondhand.
So it's not something you've experienced yourself, but something you've learned from someone or something else.
Exactly. And the most common example of indirect evidence is testimony.
Testimony. So like, if a friend tells you they saw a great movie, that's indirect evidence for you because you haven't seen the movie yourself.
That's right. You're relying on their report, their experience.
Okay, it seems like indirect evidence would be inherently less reliable than direct evidence because you're adding another layer of interpretation.
That's a natural assumption, and sometimes it's true. But here's the interesting part. Indirect evidence can actually be more reliable in some cases.
Really? How so?
Well, think about scientific instruments. A thermometer gives you indirect evidence of the temperature.
Right, you're not directly feeling the heat or coldness, you're looking at a number on a device.
Exactly. But a calibrated thermometer is going to be much more accurate than your subjective sense of hot or cold.
That's a good point.
Similarly, a computer's calculations are indirect evidence for a mathematical result.
Right, you're not doing the math yourself, you're relying on the computer's processing power.
But computers are often much more reliable at complex calculations than humans are. So the key factor here is reliability, not just whether the evidence is direct or indirect.
So it's not about where the evidence comes from, but how trustworthy it is.
Exactly.
Now, the book also touches on emotions as a potential source of evidence.
It does, but it's careful to make a distinction. While emotions are a form of internal experience, just like sensory experiences, our senses have a much better track record of providing reliable information about the external world.
That's true. Emotions can be very powerful, but they're not always a good guide to what's actually happening around us.
Right. They can cloud our judgment, distort our perceptions, and lead us to make irrational decisions.
So while emotions can provide insights into our internal state, they're not considered a primary source of reliable evidence in the same way that sensory perceptions are.
Precisely.
Okay, now there's another getting familiar with evidence exercise in the book. Did any of the examples in that exercise really stand out to you as highlighting this distinction between direct and indirect evidence?
Yeah, definitely. One example was the claim, there is life on other planets. Right now, any evidence we have for that claim is indirect.
Right, we haven't actually gone to another planet and found aliens walking around.
Exactly. We have things like radio signals, potential biosignatures detected by telescopes.
Right.
But we don't have direct, first-hand observation of extraterrestrial life, at least not yet.
So that's a good example of how the nature of the claim itself dictates what kind of evidence is available.
It does. Another interesting example was the claim, the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting. Now, you can go to the Louvre and look at the Mona Lisa.
So you can have that direct visual experience.
Right. But whether you find it beautiful or not, that's a subjective judgment.
Right.
It's not a directly observable fact in the same way as the painting's dimensions or the materials it's made from.
It's a matter of taste, of personal preference.
Exactly. So the type of claim determines what kind of evidence is relevant and how easy or difficult it is to obtain.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got claims and we've got evidence. Now, how do these two come together in what the book calls an argument?
This is where the real action happens. An argument in critical thinking is an attempt to support a claim with reasons.
So it's not just a disagreement or a heated debate.
Not in this context. It's about providing a logical structure to justify a belief.
So you're trying to persuade someone of something by giving them reasons to believe it.
Exactly.
And the book makes a strong case for why Being able to construct and analyze arguments is a hallmark of a critical thinker.
It's absolutely fundamental. It's what allows us to have reasoned discussions, to evaluate ideas, to make informed decisions.
It's the foundation of critical thinking itself.
You could say that.
Now, the book also talks about considering evidence against a claim, not just evidence that supports it.
Oh, yeah, that's a crucial point. We all have this natural tendency to look for information that confirms what we already believe.
Confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, exactly. But to be a truly critical thinker, you have to be willing to challenge your own beliefs.
To consider alternative perspectives, to look for evidence that might contradict what you think you know.
It's not always easy, but it's essential for intellectual honesty and sound judgment.
Okay, so let's get practical for a moment. In the real world, it can be hard to tell when someone is actually making an argument.
Oh, yeah. People don't always walk around saying, here's my argument. Premise 1, premise 2, conclusion.
Right. So how do we spot an argument when we encounter one in the wild?
The book gives some really helpful guidance on this. It points out that the conclusion, the main point of the argument, might not be stated explicitly at the beginning or end.
So it's a bit like being a detective looking for clues.
Exactly. And the book suggests 2 key questions to help you find the conclusion.
Okay, what are they?
The first question is, what claim is the speaker or writer trying to get me to believe?
So what's the main point they're driving at?
Right. And the second question is, what reasons or evidence are they offering to support that claim?
So what are they basing their belief on?
Exactly. Those 2 questions can really help you untangle even the most complex arguments.
They're like a mental map for navigating the terrain of an argument.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, the book also mentions indicator words as clues.
Oh, yeah, those can be helpful too.
Right, words like because, since, for often precede premises, indicating that what follows is a reason.
Right. They're like signposts saying, hey, here's a reason to believe this.
And then words like therefore, so, thus often signal that a conclusion is coming.
Yeah, like based on all this, here's what we can conclude.
Okay, but the book also cautions that not every argument will use these explicit markers.
Right, because people don't always speak or write in perfectly logical, structured ways.
So we can't just rely on keywords. We have to really understand the flow of the ideas, the underlying logic.
Exactly. It's about seeing the big picture.
Now, the book has an exercise to help us practice identifying arguments. Can you walk us through one of the examples to illustrate how we can use these techniques?
Sure. One example from the book is, the early bird gets the worm, so you should wake up early.
Okay, a classic proverb. So how do we break this down as an argument?
Well, if we ask what claim is being argued for, the answer is you should wake up early. That's the main point the statement is trying to convince you of.
Right.
And then, what's the reason given to support that claim? The premise is the early bird gets the worm. This is presented as the reason why waking up early is a good idea.
So it's a pretty simple argument, but it illustrates the basic structure of a premise leading to a conclusion.
It does. And in this case, the word so is a clear indicator that a conclusion is coming.
Right. Let's look at a slightly more complex example.
Okay.
The book gives us this one. There's no stamp on that envelope. The post office won't deliver it. The post office delivers only if there's a stamp.
Right, let's dissect this.
So what's the conclusion here?
The conclusion is the post office won't deliver it. That's the main assertion the statement is making. And then the premises, the reasons given to support that conclusion are there's no stamp on that envelope, and the post office delivers only if there's a stamp.
So both of those statements provide evidence for why the letter won't be delivered.
Exactly. Even though there isn't a single word like therefore or because linking everything together, by asking those key questions about what claim is being made and what reasons are given, we can see the underlying structure of the argument.
Right. So it's not always about finding keywords. It's about understanding the logical flow of the ideas.
Exactly.
Okay, we've now got a solid understanding of claims, evidence, and how they work together in arguments. The book then introduces inductive reasoning, which seems like a shift to a less certain kind of reasoning.
It is.
So far, we've been talking about deductive arguments, where the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises.
Right. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true.
But with inductive reasoning, things get a bit more...
Well, fuzzy.
Yeah, inductive reasoning is about probability, not certainty. So you're making inferences based on patterns, on observations.
Exactly. Like if you see that the sun has risen every day of your life, you might inductively conclude that the sun will probably rise tomorrow.
It's a reasonable conclusion based on the available evidence.
It is, but it's not a logical certainty in the same way that a valid deductive argument is.
Right. And the book points out that words like likely and probably are often indicators that we're dealing with inductive reasoning.
They are, because their arguer is acknowledging that there's a chance they could be wrong, even if their reasoning is sound.
It's about making the best judgment you can based on the evidence you have, but recognizing that there's always some degree of uncertainty.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Now, the book also talks about strong and weak quantifiers in inductive arguments.
Oh, right, the quantifiers.
Yeah, how do those play into the strength of the reasoning?
Well, quantifiers are words like all, most, some, a few. They tell us how much of something we're talking about. And the strength of the quantifier in the premises can significantly impact the strength of the conclusion.
So if you say all dogs bark, that's a much stronger claim than saying some dogs bark.
Exactly. And if you base your inductive argument on a premise with a weak quantifier, the conclusion is going to be weaker as well.
So the more general and representative the evidence is, the stronger the inductive inference can be.
Right. But we always have to remember that induction is about probability, not certainty. Even if you've seen 1,000 white swans, you can't be absolutely sure that the next swan you see won't be black.
That's the nature of inductive reasoning. You're making generalizations based on past experience, but there's always a chance that the future will surprise you.
And being aware of that possibility is a key part of being a critical thinker.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've looked at claims, how they work, how they're structured, the different types of evidence that can support them, and how all of this fits together in arguments, both deductive and inductive.
And for you, our listener, the learner, we hope that by focusing on these fundamental concepts, we've given you a solid framework for understanding how critical thinking works.
Exactly. Because once you have these tools, you can start to apply them to everything you encounter in the world.
To every news article you read, every conversation you have, every decision you make.
It's about becoming a more discerning, more thoughtful, more empowered thinker.
Absolutely.
So for our final thought today, we'd like to challenge you to put these ideas into practice. Think about a piece of information you came across recently, maybe something you read online or heard on the news.
And see if you can identify the central claim being made.
What evidence is presented to support that claim? Is it direct evidence, indirect evidence, or a combination of both?
What kind of reasoning is being used? Is the argument deductive, claiming certainty, or is it inductive, suggesting probability?
And are there any unstated assumptions that might be influencing the argument?
By actively engaging with information in this way, you'll start to hone your critical thinking skills and become a more effective evaluator of the world around you.
Absolutely. And this is just the beginning of our exploration of critical thinking. There are so many more fascinating topics to delve into, like logical fallacies, evaluating the credibility of sources, and different types of reasoning.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you the confidence to continue learning and growing as a critical thinker.
Thanks for joining us.